But my boss is from Westfield, by the way, so he tell all of you hello. He is the Securities Commissioner of Indiana. His name's Alex Glass. He also told me not to corrupt any of you, so I'm going to try really hard on that front. I am from the Secretary of State's office. Your current Secretary of State is Connie Lawson. And what I do in the office is I serve as the Senior Investor Education Coordinator. So I go all over the state of Indiana talking about issues of financial fraud. We also do personal finance education for young people, but today we are going to concentrate on fraud. Specifically, I talk about investment fraud as a general rule, but because consumer fraud is so relevant to where you are at this point in your lives, I'm going to discuss that too. However, if you guys would ever have a crime or something like that against you that's a consumer crime, you would report that to the Attorney General's office. Consumer scams are handled by them. Investment scams are handled by my office, the Secretary of State's office. As I said, I work for the Securities Division. The Securities Division is responsible for the monitoring and regulation of the investment industry in Indiana. So I'll talk a little bit about investment fraud. I'm also going to talk about some popular scams out right now. Honestly, I could talk to you guys for a week straight without ever taking a breath to even think, and I could still have more types of scams to tell you about. There's so many of them out there, but today I'm going to kind of go through the list of the really big scams that we see right now, the ones that hit the headlines the most. And if you guys ever have questions in the future regarding any kind of scam, you're not sure who to contact, you're not sure what kind of scam it is, you can always reach out to me and to my office, and we'll put you in contact with the right person.
Yeah. 1 second. And just know, you guys are going to have questions. I know I have a ton. We ran even past the bell. There's so much great information here. So as she's speaking, and if you think of a question, please write it down on your worksheet. And I know we all have stories. I told you stories how I got scammed, almost got scammed through the IRS. I'm going to just take those off the table and just really utilize the time that we have where we can talk about this more on Monday. But so I want to use Ms. Griese's time more for what specific questions do you have, not stories or, yeah, I've been scammed too, this is what happened to me, just questions. So we will address questions at the end. So if you just want to write it down so you don't forget them. So again, yeah. I apologize, Ms. Griese.
And I know you guys have a lunch break in the middle, so I'm going to try and find a really good spot to wrap before your lunch break so that we can come back and continue my presentation, because it is about an hour long. Anyway, if you want to go ahead and advance to the next one, we'll get to what the learning objectives are of my presentation today. So one more. First of all, I want you guys to be able to recognize the tricks that are used by con artists. How are they gaining your trust? How are they ultimately gaining your money or your personal information? What are the tactics that are used by them? To be able to describe some common scams out there right now, again, I can't discuss every single scam that's out there because there are so many of them. They're coming up with new ones every day. But I'm going to talk about the most common ones that we see come through our office, as well as the ones that the Attorney General's office sees come through their doors as well. To learn how to protect yourself, some self-defense tips. You guys got some handouts there. The first 2 pages that you flip through, front and back pages, deal specifically with investment fraud. Those would be great to give to your parents because you're probably not investing yet, although it's wonderful information for you to read over and understand. But pages 3 and 4 deal specifically with identity theft. And so I'm going to talk about those a little bit more in detail in terms of self-defense. And then finally, who to contact for help. What kinds of offices are out there to help you guys? Like I said, the Attorney General's office, my office, there's the Office of Insurance, there's a whole lot of people out there that can help you with that. You want to go ahead? Mm-hmm. So when we talk about the tricks of the trade, how are these fraudsters managing to manipulate you into giving money? As I told your teacher, I honestly think anyone can fall victim for a crime if it's done properly. If the salesperson is convincing enough, if they're charming enough, if the pitch that they're giving you is relevant to your life and what you're going through right now, if it's they catch you at a vulnerable time in your life when you're upset or distracted by something else, anybody can become a victim with the right sales pitch. But these sales pitches, they're always some kind of really high-pressured situation. They seem very rushed, the person who's making the sale, and that's because a lot of them are in these things called boiler rooms, rooms filled with a whole lot of people just like this, and they're neck and neck with each other, probably in another country. Jamaica is a really big one for lottery scams. IRS scam is really big in India and Pakistan. So pretty much anywhere you go, Canada has a lot of the grandparent scam. You're going to find people in other countries who, this is what they do for a living. They lie to people for a living. It's their job. They're getting paid for it, but not very much. The way they get paid is sort of like commission. The more of you that they talk to, the better their chances that one of you is going to fall victim for whatever it is they're saying. So they're going to want to talk to as many people a day as possible so that they can get that commission to feed their own families. They don't like to take no for an answer. So, you know, that high pressured situation is really on their end too. They're under a lot of pressure to make sure that they can convince you to give over your personal information or some money. So they don't want to take no for an answer. If there's any chance that you seem like a sucker, they're going to keep pushing until they get what they want. Too good to be true is kind of one variation of these sales pitches. They can also go in the scary category of telling you that something bad is going to happen if you don't do what they say. But if we're going in the hopes and dreams side of things, something good is going to happen, there's usually some sort of incentive that they're offering, a gift. These gifts can be really small. They can be things like a free hat or a free t-shirt, maybe the Colts or Purdue or IU. And they're like, you can get this, just I need you to sign this piece of paper with your name, your address, your phone number, your email, or maybe it's just your email, maybe it's just your phone number, because we're going to contact you when you win the big prize. But here's like a small prize, thanks for taking part in this. Then they've got your personal information. Now the company that collected this, they may be a legitimate company. They may be someone that you do want to do business. But do you know what they do with your personal information? Are they going to sell it to someone else who sells it to someone else and eventually end up in the hands of a crook? Now, the fact is that most of our personal information is already out there anyway. My grandmother died a few years ago at the age of 100. Her personal information is online. She never used a computer in her entire life, and she's got information online about her. So it's out there. I'm going to be talking to you about ways to make your information less valuable once it's out there. So these awesome incentives can be very large too. Things like free cruises or you know, airplane tickets or something like that. Any kind of incentive to get you on board. What I like to encourage people to do is think about how much is your personal information worth to you? How much is your life savings worth to you? And is it worth whatever trinket or other thing that they're promising in order to get information or a small fee out of you? When it comes to investing in particular, if someone is saying something is low risk or no risk, you know, you should be very cautious. If it's low risk, you should expect low returns in investing. Risk and reward go up and down together in the investment industry. So if there is a low risk investment, you're probably not going to get a lot of money back in return. Think about your savings accounts. You have a savings account, you're maybe getting a few cents a month in interest on that. That's what I mean. Savings account is really low risk. It's probably nothing that's going to happen to that money. It's not going to go anywhere unless you spend it. But the return that you're getting on that is really low. Now, if you do something like stocks or even mutual funds, things like that, when you start getting up in the risk category, then the returns are a little bit higher too. But in terms of having a no-risk investment, that does not exist. There is no such thing as a no-risk investment. All investing has risk attached to it. It's just how much risk you're willing to tolerate. My brother and I use the same financial advisor. He's a high-risk investor. He likes to kind of gamble with his money and see what happens. I'm a very low-risk to moderate-risk investor. And so our investment advisor knows that we have different styles, and he accounts for that in how he places our money in the stock market. Limited information. So I like to tell young people, because yes, you are going to have to start adulting very soon, and it's not fun, I promise. There are fun parts, but overall, adulting equals paperwork, lots of paperwork. And so if somebody doesn't have much in writing, if there's not a whole bunch of legal stuff that you have to sign ahead of buying something valuable, you can bet that's probably not real, because anything that is real is going to have a lot of paperwork attached to it. Just like a mortgage has a lot of paperwork attached, a car loan has a lot of paperwork attached. Adulting is paperwork. You can go ahead. So next I'm going to show you a video. Your teacher told me about a call that she got from one of these IRS fraudsters. So have you guys all heard about the IRS scam? Yeah, how many of you do you think have gotten calls at home from somebody saying they're from the IRS? A couple people, okay. They're very common. My brother gets one about once a month. I, for some reason, have never gotten a call from someone claiming to be from the IRS. I also screen every single phone call I get and don't answer the phone unless that person is already saved in my phone contacts. But don't tell my mother I sometimes screen her phone calls too. She'd be so mad. So I don't answer the phone, but this woman was answering the phone. Her name is Dawn Belmonte. She lives up in Canada. Canada has its own version of the IRS. And so she was getting a whole lot of these fake IRS calls. Got so sick of it, she decided to record one of the calls and play along and pretend that she believed what the guy was saying to her, so that people could hear the types of sales tactics, the type of threats, everything else that this fraudster made in the phone conversation. Everything she's saying is a lie. She doesn't even tell him her real name, and he still tells her that she owes money. So she made up another name, Marissa. But I want you to pay attention to the kinds of threats that the fraudster makes. I want you to pay attention to how he tries to negotiate with her in the call as well. And then we'll talk a little bit more about it afterward. Go ahead.
Hello? Yes. Just hold on. Please, I have to phone someone to take care of my children. Miss Madison, you there? Hello? Yes, I'm here. Okay, Miss Madison, this is David. I'm the head of department with Revenue Canada. Now, I got the information from one of my colleagues that there has been a case filed against you, but you're short of money. You don't have money right now, right? No, I have nothing. Okay, now, Miss, do you have any kind of a line of credit in your bank? No, I have nothing. My husband took all our money, and he's in jail right now because he had tax evasion, and now he's going to get me in trouble. No, it's not like that, miss. Is there anything that you can pawn? No, I have nothing. I only have my children and my pets. Do you know how much you owe? He told me $2,500. I don't have any money. Miss Madison, no need to cry. I'm here to help you. That's the reason I called you from my side, okay? Okay. Now, what you can do, you can just pay the 10% of the total outstanding amount, and we can keep the warrant on a hold. Just like we can cancel the arrest warrant, and once the arrest warrant is canceled, you will get like 15 to 20 days to arrange the funds. But I don't even have $50. I didn't have enough money to buy milk. I had to borrow $5 from my neighbor. I don't have any money. Miss Madison, it is like that. You can just try to borrow $200 from someone, and you can tell them that you will pay them back. I can't. I already owe the money for the milk. I haven't even paid them back the $5. Is there anyone who can help you out, like your friends or relatives or something like that? No, because I'm not even supposed to be in Canada. I'm not even supposed to be here. Miss Madison, you also will be arrested, so make sure keep this thing in your mind that what happens to your children after that. So you can try to pawn something, or else you can try to borrow something for just like $200. I don't have anything. I'm sorry. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I have no money, and I have nothing. I'm not even supposed to be here in Canada. Do you have a cell phone? From where do you belong? I don't have a cell phone. From where do you belong? From where do I belong? What do you mean? Are you from Canada? No, I'm from the United States. You're from the United States? Yes, and my husband brought me here, and he made me come here from the United States, and then he got in jail, and now I'm by myself with our 6 children, and I have no money. Is there anyone who can send money from the United States who can help you out for you for like $200? No, because all of my family is already, my mom and my dad are passed away, and I was an only child. I have no family. That's why I came here. For a new life with this husband, and now he's in jail. No, let me tell you one thing. No need to cry. One thing more here, do not get worried about anything, because this is whatever we have told you is totally wrong. This is a scam, and we were just trying to take money out of you. Okay? Oh my goodness. Now you just need to take care that from now onwards, if you get any call from anybody asking you for money, make sure don't pay anything to them. I don't have anything to pay them anyway. Yes, but I'm telling you that this is a scam, and don't fall for it. Oh. Do not call you, but somebody else will call you, but make sure that don't fall for it, okay? Oh, thank you so much. I'm so relieved. Make sure, and don't get worried about anything. Nothing will happen to you, okay? The police aren't going to come here? No, nobody will come. Nobody will come. And they're not going to take my children?
Nobody. Nothing will happen to you, not here.
I was going to kill myself. Thank you so much. Goodbye.
I swear that is the only time people ever laugh when someone says I was going to kill myself is in that video. Every single time I play it, people get a chuckle out of that because, you know, she was apparently convincing enough with her acting that she made the scammer feel bad. He admitted to what he's doing. He said, quote, "No need to cry. Do not worry about anything because what I have told you is totally wrong. This is a scam. I was just trying to get money out of you." And then he went on to say, you know, other people are going to call you. Don't give money to them. I wonder if that guy got fired that day for admitting to that, especially if this video, and it went viral, millions of people have seen this video. It's been featured on news programs worldwide to explain how this program, this IRS scam works. So I'm sure once his bosses heard that, they weren't too happy with him for admitting that it was a scam. And I didn't think her acting was that great, but apparently it was good enough for him. So the reason why the IRS scam works is that tax laws are confusing. A lot of people, especially young people who are paying taxes for the first time, or maybe immigrants to this country who are paying our taxes for the first time, it's very confusing to figure out how all of this works and know what you're supposed to be paying. So if you're not sure if you've done it right, if you did your taxes for yourself for the first time and used to use a CPA, maybe you worry that it's legitimate. And then you could fall victim for this kind of scam, even though it's a very well-known scam. The other thing that's causing a new wrinkle in this whole situation is that we used to be able to tell people the IRS is never going to call you. The IRS is never going to call you. Well, sort of. Now they allow for debt collection agencies to call you if you really do owe money to the IRS. So someone from a debt collection agency, if you actually do owe a debt, could call you and say, we're calling on behalf of your outstanding balance with the IRS. That may be legitimate. However, it will not be the first contact that you receive from the IRS that says you owe money. You're going to get letters far, far in advance of that and know if you are in some kind of tax trouble. There were a few points of interest in that video. The scammer threatened arrest and mentioned a warrant multiple times in it. He tried to negotiate with the woman as well, saying, well, okay, so you're in a really bad financial shape here. How about, you know, you just pay 10% of what you owe? Well, what happens then is, let's say she did believe him and she paid that 10%. Now he's got a victim on the hook for a really long time and can keep coming back and further exploiting her. You can tell all of his scam buddies, hey, this woman, she doesn't know what she's doing. She's going to fall for anything that you call her with, so you can rip her off too. If she only pays that 10%, then the next time he comes back to call her, he says, you owe interest on your outstanding balance, so you're going to have to pay even more now. Or we didn't receive that check. We don't think you really sent it. You still owe us more money. So there's a whole lot of different ways that can go. The other thing that's really interesting about this is he said, you know, can you pawn some items that you own? Can you borrow money from friends or family to pay your debt? They really will do anything to try and get you to pay something to them that day. Because again, like I said, the scammers, they sort of work on commission. If they don't scam you, they're not going to make any money either. Go ahead.
On the
next one,
oh,
yeah.
Sorry.
So the grandparent scam, have you guys heard of this one before? Does some of you know if your grandparents have received the call? Okay. When I talk to, let's say, a group of senior citizens, maybe there's 50 people in the room, at least one of them has fallen victim for it. Usually one of them will admit to it. Most of them will admit to getting the phone call. I'm going to guarantee there's at least 2 or 3 other people in the room that fell for it and didn't want to admit it because they're too embarrassed to tell anybody that they fell for this scam. The way it works is the caller is claiming to be one of you, and that's why I'm talking to you guys about this scam, because I do want you to make sure that you discuss it with your grandparents and help protect them against this crime. They're going to call grandma or grandpa, and they're going to say, Grandma, Grandpa, there's been an accident, I've been arrested, I was driving drunk, something like that. These calls are most common around typical vacations for young people. So spring break, Christmas break, times when you guys might actually be out of the country or out of state, because it makes the scam more realistic if your grandparents aren't actually sure where you are during your spring break vacation. Maybe you did decide to go to Daytona this week at the last minute with your friends. So it makes the scam more believable. These calls also typically come in the middle of the night, somewhere around 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning. The reason for this is that bad calls come in the middle of the night. Also, we're disoriented when we first wake up, all of us, regardless of age. You answer that phone, you see that it's 2 a.m., you're like, who is calling me? And then suddenly on the other end of the phone, someone's crying or screaming. That is gonna make your heart level go way up, and you're immediately in panic mode and not paying attention to the fact that the person calling you doesn't actually sound like your grandchild. They will try to get off the phone very quickly and hand the phone to someone else that they claim is the lawyer, that they claim is a police officer, that they claim is a doctor, because they want that person to be the one to talk to you. Again, making sure that grandma or grandpa doesn't have a chance to figure out that it's not really you by listening to the differences in your voice. They may say that I injured my face, I injured my throat, I'm sick, it's a bad connection. They have all sorts of excuses for why they don't sound like you. If you post anything publicly on your social media that they might have access to, they may know what nicknames you call your grandparents if you've ever posted about it. They may know names of family members because they used Ancestry.com. So these are all things that they can use to make this scam more realistic if necessary. Then they're going to tell the grandparents, please don't tell mom and dad. I'll get in so much more trouble if you tell them. I'll tell them when I get home, just help me get home, please, 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 grandma. They get into that begging mode, and your grandparents, because they love you, are going to do it if they believe that this scam is real. Finally, when they ask for the money, they'll have them do it a few different ways. It could be something like a Western Union money transfer, or they could ask grandma or grandpa to go to the local convenience store or Walmart, something like that, to get prepaid cards. I've even heard of them using Apple iTunes gift cards. It's ridiculous, but maybe grandparents don't know what iTunes is and they're not sure what they're really buying, because I don't know of any doctor's office or jail that would accept that as payment, an iTunes gift card. But a lot of times there are these other types of prepaid cards that you can buy, load them up with a bunch of cash. Once the number on the back of that card then is given to somebody, they can do a digital transfer immediately. It is untraceable and you're not getting your money back once the money's been transferred. Tens of thousands of dollars are lost this way per individual. I'm going to show you a quick video now. This is a news report that CBS News did a few years ago, and it includes an interview with a scammer as well as an interview with a victim.
We're getting rare insight this morning into a scam. It targets and steals money from grandparents. Carter Evans sat down with an admitted con artist who reveals how it works. He's in Los Angeles with a CBS News investigation. Carter, good morning.
Good morning, Charlie. The scam begins with something most grandparents don't get enough. A phone call from a grandchild, or so the caller says, but it almost always ends with a desperate plea for money, and the criminal you're about to meet used to be on the other end of the line.
Shackled in federal custody, this 31-year-old con man is awaiting sentencing in California for his role in what's known as the grandparent scam.
Carter.
He agreed to let us in on how he did it, but only if we wouldn't reveal his name.
You can make 10 grand sometimes in a day if you do it properly.
Part of an elaborate scheme run out of Canada, he would call senior citizens in the U.S., impersonating a grandchild in distress, begging for cash.
Give me an idea of how a typical call would go.
So you just say, hey, how are you? Hi. Hi, Grandma. Hi, Grandpa. I'm under the weather. It's a bad connection. I'm in a little bit of trouble right now. If I tell you, just keep it between us. I'm on vacation, but I got into a little accident, and you know, I was arrested for DUI. You tell them things got out of control and I need to send me the money.
How many people would fall for this?
1 out of 50, maybe?
It's estimated senior citizens are robbed of roughly $3 billion a year in financial scams. Phone scams are often run outside the U.S., out of boiler rooms like this one busted in Canada last year. And con artists usually buy their victims' personal information online, including age and income.
We target people over the age of 65, mainly, because they're more gullible, they're at home, they're more accessible. Once you get them emotionally involved, then they'll do anything for you, basically.
Doug Shadell is with AARP.
We've had doctors and lawyers fall for this. It doesn't really matter what your educational level is, because it triggers something emotional that causes you to act.
I was upset and sort of frantic.
It happened to this 81-year-old grandmother. She was home alone in California last September when her phone rang.
Hello?
The caller said he was her 29-year-old grandson, arrested for driving drunk in North Carolina.
There was a desperation and an urgency in his voice, partly because he said, "Love you."
Did it sound like him?
No, but he said he had a broken nose. I just wanted him to be home with his family. That's all I wanted.
So she immediately sent almost $18,000 to a bank account in North Carolina, thinking it was going to a lawyer. But her grandson wasn't in jail and wasn't in North Carolina. Her money was gone.
Please enter your
We dialed the number of the person who called her. It's now disconnected.
We're sorry. Your call cannot be completed at this time.
You are blinded by emotion, totally blinded. You don't think rationally when you get this. You know, your family comes first.
It's just so cold-hearted and horrifying.
Assistant U.S. Attorney Ellen Lindsay prosecuted the scammer we spoke to.
And the effect on the victims is so great. It's not simply the loss of the money. They feel stupid, they feel gullible, and they have nightmares about it and anxiety and depression.
People are going to want to know what drives a person like you when you know how much pain it's causing you.
I didn't know how much pain this was causing people.
How could you not know?
I thought people, were making $100,000 a year and they would lose a couple thousand here and there.
But that doesn't make it okay.
I mean, people lose money all the time, but it's just
And in most cases, they never get it back.
What did you do with the money?
What did I do with it? Spent most of it.
I think he recognizes now that it's a despicable thing that he did. And he's doing the right thing in trying to get the word out. He also knows that this will be a factor considered by the judge in his sentencing. But if you ask me, what he's most sorry about is getting caught.
Do you feel remorse?
Of course. Wouldn't you?
It's hard to tell how many senior citizens have been scammed like this because there is no national data.
The next part is him chatting with the anchors back in the studio, and you guys really don't need to listen to that part. I used to work in news, and nobody likes anchor chat. So not even the anchors enjoy it. There were a few interesting points from that video that I just wanted to reiterate. The fraudster and I believe even the grandmother used the word gullible, and they talked about feeling stupid and embarrassed. That is really common in these kinds of crimes where the senior feels embarrassed, they feel stupid, they feel gullible. In this particular crime though, the grandparent scam, I don't think that's all the case. I think it's really more a fact of your grandparents love you and they are desperate to help you. The grandmother talked about being frantic. And just, she wanted her grandson home and safe. So all logic kind of goes out the window when you're scared like that. And that's part of why this crime works. I do want to, though, encourage all of you to talk to your grandparents about this scam in case they're not yet aware of it, in case they've never heard of it before. Because first of all, if you guys ever really are in trouble, I'd like you to have some kind of password with your grandparents that says, yeah, this is really me. If you do know about this crime, Grandma, ask me a question that only I am going to know the answer to make sure it's really me, because I would hate for your grandparents to hang up on one of you by accident if you're really in a bind one day. So come up with a password. It shouldn't be something that's easy to guess or something that's available on your social media, because I've heard people say, well, what's my pet's name? If you have ever posted anything about your pet, the person may know what your pet's name is, so don't use that. And sometimes grandparent nicknames and things like that are also a good indication of knowing who is really on the other end of the line. If you call your grandma Meemaw and the con artist says grandma, your grandmother is going to know that that's not really you that's calling. So who's heard of the tech support scam? Anyone ever gotten the call? Okay. There's a few variations of this scam. The older version of it is the one where they call and say there's something wrong with your computer. They claim to be from Dell or Microsoft or Apple. When I talk to senior citizens, I'm always amused by the number of people who get that call and don't own a computer. And the person's like, well, my records say that you do. I'm like, yeah, you don't have any records. You're just calling random people until you get a hold of someone who falls for it. The newer version of this crime that seems to be a little bit more effective is to say that this is a courtesy call from a big telecom company like AT&T, Verizon, Comcast. They're claiming that this is part of a survey, a customer survey, that they just want to know if you're happy with your service. And so that seems to be working a lot better. I actually did get this call once from somebody. They called me at work claiming to be from AT&T, that this was a courtesy call to see if I was happy with my internet service. Well, number one, I actually do have AT&T as my internet provider, but the problem is that they called me at work, and AT&T does not have my work phone number. So I knew immediately that it was a con, and apparently like 8 of my coworkers got the same call within an hour. So they had gotten a hold of a state employee phone directory and made all of these calls, hoping one of us would give them some information. So what they're hoping for, number one, that you're a customer of the company that they're claiming to represent. Number two, that you've got beef with that company. Because if any one of you has ever sat on hold waiting to talk to tech support, you know that it is not a quick and speedy process where someone is going to voluntarily call you and offer to help solve all of your problems. No. These big companies don't actually care about your user experience as long as you're continuing to pay them money. So they're not going to call you out of the blue and just offer to make all of your problems go away. But if you do happen to get one of these calls and fall for it and you say, yeah, I am an AT&T customer and my internet's been terrible lately. Netflix isn't streaming. I couldn't watch Game of Thrones last night. Something like that, you're going to be really mad and you're going to want them to fix it. So they're going to be like, absolutely, Miss Griese, I just need you to visit this website and click on this link. And once you do that, I can go in and fix the problem for you from my end. Now, remote access is something that has plenty of legitimate functions. I work for the state of Indiana, and so our IT guy, at least once a week, has to use remote access on my computer to fix something that's not working, because I complain to him a lot. So Bill will log in to his computer, use remote access, fix whatever's broken on my end without ever having to come to my desk. That's a really good way to use remote access. But criminals who are using remote access are doing it for nefarious purposes. They are going to try and build in some kind of secret backdoor into your network so that anytime your computer is connected to the internet, they can log in and spy on whatever you're doing. This could be as simple as collecting your passwords when you're online, to going through your digital files that are saved on there, looking for any IRS banking documents, things like that that have all your personal information on it, maybe tells them how much money that you have that's available to be stolen. There's a lot of data mining that can happen in these sorts of cases. The more sinister side of it, even with spyware. Some older computers, the web cameras that are on them, they didn't used to notify you when the web camera was turned on. Now they put little lights on them that light up that let you know when that camera is active. But this actually contributed to child pornography in the past, that young people would have web cameras that someone was remotely accessing and turning on and watching young people in their bedrooms. So it contributed to a very serious problem. If they could do this on your phone, and a lot of iOS devices are too sophisticated, the security for them to hack into it, but if your phone isn't very secure, they could potentially check and see what the GPS is on the phone. They can turn on the microphone on the phone and listen in on things that are happening. So that can be really dangerous too. At the end of this whole call, if you've believed everything that they've told you and you don't know that something bad is going on, they may even try to charge you for this service and say, well, you know, we hope that you appreciated the service, but there is a customer service charge that you have to pay. So then they'll ask for your credit card information, and now they have that as well. There's a lot of different levels to this crime, and it's just best to hang up on anyone who calls you claiming to be from customer service or from tech support, because they're just not going to reach out to you. You want to go ahead, Julie? Ponzi schemes. So Ponzi schemes specifically apply to investing. And again, that's the specialty in my office in the securities division. Ponzi schemes are named after Charles Ponzi. That's his mugshot right up there. In the early 1920s, he became known as a swindler in North America. Now, Charles Ponzi promised his clients a 50% profit within 45 days or a 100% profit within 90 days. I know you guys aren't investors now, but doesn't that sound like a ridiculously large return on an investment? It is. 8% would be a little bit more realistic over a long period of time. So he was lying to investors, but they maybe weren't as savvy back then as we are now about investing. His victims lost some $20 million, again, early 1920s. If you account for inflation, that'd be closer to $240 million in today's money. So the way Ponzi scheme works is you've got this central operator here like Charles Ponzi, who's running the scam, and it forms a pyramid. The people at the bottom of the pyramid are always paying the people above them. There are no actual profits because there is no actual investment. Julie, do you want to play the video on this one?
So, you may have heard about Ponzi schemes in the news. Everybody knows they're illegal, but you might not understand how they work. So Ben is here to show us. To start off, Ben gets a few people to invest their money with him. At the end of the year, he gives those clients amazing returns that beats every other investor in the market. Needless to say, the investors are thrilled. In fact, they're so ecstatic about all the money they're making that they tell all their friends and family about it too. Who tell their friends, who tell their friends. In the stock market, most investors make money some years and lose money others. But Ben's Ponzi scheme, yeah, it never loses money. In fact, it always beats the market by a huge margin. But the returns he pays to these people aren't from actual profits. He just takes the money these new guys invest and gives it to these guys. But as soon as you can't get enough new money from this group to pay these people, then the whole pyramid starts to crumble because they're not getting paid anymore. Ben and these guys who invested first made a killing, but these folks lost all their money. So the next time a guy like Ben tries to get you to invest in something that sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Just ask Ben.
So, again, these scams can fall apart for one of the reasons that you saw in that video is when you run out of essentially new investors to bring that money on board. That's kind of what can happen with someone like Charles Ponzi too, although in his specific case, it wasn't about running out of new investors to contribute to that money, to the pot of money. In his case, it was that he just took off. The promoter vanishes with the money, and then suddenly people are like, why am I not getting my checks? The thing with Ponzi schemes that you should know is everyone loves a Ponzi scheme until it falls apart because you're making amazing returns, supposedly. And everyone thinks that this is a great opportunity. You can't wait to tell all your friends and family about it and get them on board with it too, because the returns are so much higher than average. But sometimes these fall apart for another reason, and that's external market forces. You want to advance one? External market forces are why this guy's scam fell apart. Does anyone recognize him? Bernie Madoff, do you know the name? He made off with billions of dollars. So Bernie Madoff is the most famous example of investment fraud of all time. His scheme fell apart in 2008 when the market downturn accelerated because of the recession that happened in 2008. Everyone got really panicked about their money being invested in stocks. They thought they were going to lose everything. So these really rich guys all went to him and said, I want my money back, I want my money back. But he couldn't keep up with the demand of people wanting to take money out of his investment scheme. This is believed to be the largest Ponzi scheme in history. Prosecutors estimate the size of the fraud to be $64.8 billion, that is with a B. What's even more surprising is that $64.8 billion was controlled by just 4,800 people. So 4,800 people were victims in a scam. These are some really rich people who lost a lot of money. And I hear people say all the time, well, investment fraud, that's a rich people crime. It's not. In this particular case, it was a rich people crime. But I talked to folks who they invested $20,000 and that's their entire life savings. They lost it all. You don't have to be rich to be invested. Investing can help you get rich if you do it right, but you don't have to be rich to invest, and you don't have to be rich to be a victim of this kind of crime. Bernie Madoff is currently serving 150 years in prison. This scam was front page news for probably 2 years. Every single day there was another update about Bernie Madoff. His wife has been completely ostracized. Among his victims were a lot of celebrities. Also, Holocaust victims were his victims because he preyed upon a charitable fund that was meant to help Holocaust survivors. He was a Jewish man, and he went after the Jewish community heavily in this scam. And then, like I said, a lot of celebrities fell for it too. Even investment professionals fell for this. The Securities and Exchange Commission, which is responsible nationally for the investment industry, they knew about this crime for 10 years, that someone was coming forward to them saying, there's a crime here, there's a crime here, there's a crime here. And they didn't do anything about it because they thought it was one of those things that was so big, it was so popular, there's no way it could be fake. This guy was trying to tell them for a long time, the math isn't adding up, you need to shut this down. And they didn't do anything about it. And so one of my friends who works for the SEC, she's never going to talk about this case. They hate talking about this case because they let the ball drop on it. So it's not a really great one. I want to wrap for this segment on this one. When we come back, we're going to talk about these guys up here because they are our own Bernie Madoffs here in Indiana. We'll talk about some Indiana specific examples with you guys. Do you have questions on anything I've asked or told you about so far? Yeah.
So what happened with
$64 billion? I don't remember how much was actually recovered. So in this case, there were some people who got out of the scheme before it actually fell apart, and those are considered ill-gotten gains. If they made money off the scheme and got out before it was actually shut down or before it fell apart, they had to surrender some of that money to authorities to help distribute amongst all victims. So that happens sometimes when these scams fell apart. If you made money off of the scam, they may come and collect that money from you to make sure the other victims get some of their money back. But the sad truth is that it's pennies on the dollar usually that people get back in these kinds of scams. You had a question?
What is screening a call?
What is screening a call? So screening a call is you see that, you know, whoever is on your caller ID when they're calling you, don't answer it. If you don't know the number, if it's not someone who's already in your phone book, I wouldn't answer it. They are able to manipulate what your caller ID says, the scammer is. It can say it's a 317 phone number that's calling you when it's really coming from somewhere overseas. They may be using your best friend's phone number as what shows up in the caller ID even. Just the other week, I got a call from myself, apparently. It was my own caller ID that popped up on it, had my picture because my picture is saved in my phone underneath my contact information. And so it showed me smiling, and I was like, wow, is that future me calling current me to let me know something's happening? That's a scam that's working really well apparently because people are so confused by the fact that their own phone number is calling them, they almost always answer it. So it's really interesting. That's just my timer, not my actual phone. Like I said, I don't answer phone calls unless I know exactly who's calling, and even then, sometimes I don't. Let it go to voicemail. Just, you know, don't answer it if you don't know who it is. If they leave you a voice message, pay really close attention to whatever the number is. I used to have a loan company, or claimed to be a loan company, calling me about a problem with my account. The number that they gave me to call back was only 1-digit difference from the real loan company. So they were hoping that I wouldn't notice and that I would call them instead and give them my personal information. They claimed to be Sally Mae, and they called me once a month, every month for 5 years. It was so irritating. And they always left me the same voice message with a guy whose name I couldn't really understand, and they wanted me to call back. If you get these calls and you think there might be a real problem, like maybe I thought there was a problem with my loan, look at your actual statement that you receive in the mail from that company. Look for the phone number that's on there. Call them back directly with the number that you know is real and say, I got this phone call. Is this legitimate or is this a scam? And they'll let you know. They knew that this was a scam. Sally Mae was aware of the problem. So, you know, just make sure you investigate it ahead of time. Talk to your local bank if there's ever kind of an opportunity that you're presented with. Your banker might know if that's a scam or not. Any other questions before you guys head to lunch? Well, cool. Thank you guys, and I'll see you probably here in a little bit when your lunch wraps up. All right, so let's continue by talking about some Indiana fraudsters. I mentioned to you guys about Ponzi schemes and about Bernie Madoff, but I want to talk about some Indiana cases that our office has helped investigate and prosecute. Marcus Schrinker is the one here on the far left. Have you guys heard that name before? A few of you? So he made headlines back in 2009, not too long after the Bernie Madoff case, actually. The reason why he's so famous in Indiana is not because of the amount of money that he stole, which was about $1 million from Indiana investors and about $4 million total, but because of how he tried to get away. He was a pilot at the time. That's his airplane back there. Used to be his airplane. Now it's a pile of rubble somewhere in a scrap heap. He tried to fake his own death by crashing his plane into Florida. So what happened was that on January 10th, 2009, he put his motorcycle on a trailer, drove it down to Florida, or actually to Alabama, Harpersville, Alabama, put it in a storage unit. There had saddlebags on the side that were filled with money and supplies, camping supplies. Then he drove back up to Indiana. He scheduled a flight from Anderson, Indiana to Destin, Florida the very next day that he was going to be flying the plane because he was a private pilot. But somewhere over Birmingham, Alabama, he put in a distress call to the Federal Aviation Authorities saying that the windshield was broken, he was bleeding profusely, and the plane was going down. Then he cut off communication with the FAA, and he opened the cockpit door and parachuted out. He later told us that he was trying to commit suicide. I don't know who tries to commit suicide with a parachute. It doesn't really work that way. But he put the plane on autopilot, thinking that the airplane was going to have enough fuel in it to crash into the ocean. Unfortunately, because the cockpit door was open, that created enough drag that the fuel ran out faster than he anticipated, and it crashed less than a football field length away from homes on the ground in Milton, Florida. It was just 75 yards away from home. The next day then, after the crash, we weren't sure if he was dead or alive, but we had already been investigating him. So we immediately put an asset freeze in place on all of his assets. What that does is it prevents any money from being spent, any money from disappearing, things like that, in order to protect whatever money is left in his accounts, his house, any of his belongings. All of that is under a freeze so that we can use that money then to pay back victims after we've prosecuted him. We also ordered an asset freeze on his wife because she was his chief financial officer. She's the woman in the picture there with him. We didn't end up prosecuting her, even though we had some evidence against her, because we really wanted to go after Marcus Schrinker because he was the primary concern of ours. The day after the asset freeze, so on the 13th, just 3 days after the plane crash, he sent an email to a friend of his back home, and that's how we were able to catch him, because we were monitoring his electronic communications by that point. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 10 years in prison, but he only spent 5 behind bars. He is currently a free man on probation somewhere down in Florida. I think last I heard he was working as a mechanic, an auto mechanic, because he cannot get a better job than that. He is banned from working in the investment industry for the rest of his life. He had a very, very nice home on Geist Reservoir. He had a very nice condo that his girlfriend lived in, not his wife, his girlfriend. His wife and his girlfriend had matching dogs from the same litter of puppies. And they went to the same plastic surgeon that he paid for both of them to start to look like each other. It was really weird. He was featured in a lot of different news reports at the time. Again, I used to be a news producer, and I covered this story extensively. He sent really intimidating letters and communications to the journalists who covered his story, saying they were getting it wrong. Same thing with the securities office where I work now, saying that we got it all wrong. Just in the last 2 weeks, I believe it was, that his daughter did an interview with the Indianapolis Star talking about how she's been homeless essentially for the last 10 years or so, and that she's had drug problems and financial problems. His whole family fell apart as a result of this. His own aunt was one of his victims in his scam. Pilots, a lot of Delta pilots were victims in his scam because he used something that we call affinity fraud. And that's where you prey upon people who have common interests with you so that you seem like someone they can trust because you guys have that common bond with one another. Keenan Houck is the man in the middle there. He is currently serving a 10-year prison sentence in Minnesota. He was sentenced in December 2011 after one of his coworkers ratted him out. We ended up developing actually a whistleblower program because of this case, because we wanted to encourage the good guys in the industry to get rid of the bad ones. Prior to his arrest, though, he was a prominent money manager in Fishers. He actually started Indiana's first hedge fund, and he was a popular media figure. He made regular appearances on CNBC, Fox News Business, Bloomberg TV and radio. He even had a regular column in the Indianapolis Business Journal, so he was very well thought of in the community. He ended up stealing some $9 million from 97 of his investors in a Ponzi scheme. Since we found out about this one through someone who was a whistleblower, we were able to investigate very quickly and very quietly and get a lot of information about him to put an asset freeze into place the moment that we took him into custody when we arrested him. That helped protect a lot of the money for the investors who had lost it. We ended up getting an initial $1 million back from that asset freeze. Several of his victims also received money from our state restitution fund. It is the first of its kind in the nation. What it does is all the people in the investment industry in Indiana who commit small violations of the law, not worth going to prison for, but just small errors, they have to pay fines to our office. We put those fines into a big pot of money that can be used to pay back victims who've lost money in these scams. The money also can be used for education purposes, like me being here today and speaking with you. That's why my program is free to anyone in the state who wants to have me come and speak. The restitution fund, though, it can pay up to $15,000 to someone who's lost money. It's not a lot when some of these people are losing hundreds of thousands of dollars, but it's better than them getting nothing back. Additionally, Houck's accountants, his CPA firm, we felt like that there was enough evidence in his financial dealings that there was a Ponzi scheme that they should have alerted us to a problem, that it was pretty clear what was happening. So we held them responsible for that. We reached a $1.8 million settlement with their office for failing to disclose his criminal acts. His victims, Houck's victims, got back 33% of their money. That's actually kind of high. So typically it's pennies on the dollar that folks get back in these sorts of schemes. He still owes $7.1 million in restitution that he will probably never be able to pay back. So even when restitution is ordered in these cases by a judge, it doesn't mean that you're going to get that money back, because if the person can't pay, if they're not someone who, you know, writes the next bestseller or sells their movie rights or something like that, like Shrinker probably will at some point, they're not going to make enough money to pay you back. Vaughn Reeves is the one on the far right. He is a former church pastor of Sullivan, Indiana. He is currently serving 54 years in prison. It is the longest prison sentence we've ever managed to get in one of these kinds of cases. He pleaded guilty to 9 felony counts of running a Ponzi scheme through his company called Alinar. This is a case that the FBI actually had access to for several years. They couldn't figure it out. They didn't know how to follow the money properly. Our office got it, and one of our investigators, Charlie Williams, is actually the one who cracked this case. After the FBI failed with it, he managed to figure out what was going on. Some 11,000 people lost a total of $120 million in this case. What Reeves did was he used Bible passages. He would pray with his victims. He would tell them that they were doing God's work. The money that they were investing, they thought was going to church bonds, that it would be used to build new churches and renovate older churches. So a lot of these people, they were investing specifically based on their faith. He completely betrayed that faith in them. Instead, he and his 3 sons diverted money from the new investors to pay off previous investors. That's a Ponzi scheme. They also pocketed $6 million for themselves, used it to buy airplanes, houses, vacations, sports cars. They loved Porsche. Who doesn't? But yeah, he's still in prison right now. He is actually fighting that sentence at the moment, hoping to get another court date to say that he did not have proper representation in this case, and he thinks that his case should be thrown out and he should be released from prison. We'll see how that works out. Want to go ahead? Americans lose an estimated $40 billion each year in investment fraud. The last year that I have data on is 2016. We got back about $300 million of $40 billion. So most of the money is gone. I want to end today with identity theft because it's very important right now. Who's heard of the Equifax breach recently? Okay. I just want to stress to everyone, my mom was all panicked about this. She's like, I don't know if I'm a victim. I tried going to the website and I can't get it to work and see if I'm a victim. I'm like, Mom, if you aren't a victim of this breach, you were a victim of the last one, or you will be a victim of the next one. Eventually, we will all fall victim to some kind of breach in the system. And I think a lot of you probably get talked out a lot about your own personal responsibility for your behavior online and how you use the internet and the personal information you're giving out. You could be the most diligent person in the world, never giving out personal information to anyone and being really responsible, and that still leaves these big companies that have access to your data, like Walgreens, like Walmart, like Target, Yahoo, Equifax, what was one of the other ones? Anthem. These big companies that you have to give your personal information to, if they're not careful with that personal information, it's going to get out there in the hands of somebody. I am dreading the day that Amazon becomes a victim of a hack, because everyone's got an Amazon account and it's got a lot of your personal information on it. The best way to protect yourself against identity theft is to make your identity less valuable to the thieves. So the number one thing I want you to do is to check your credit reports. Who's in here is 18 already? Okay. So when you turn 18 and when you get your first line of credit, whether it's a credit card, whether it's a car loan, whether it's a student loan, that's going to activate a credit report for you. You check your credit reports every year. The federal government set up this website, annualcreditreport.com, that entitles you to 3 credit reports per year, 1 from each of the 3 credit reporting agencies. They're Equifax, TransUnion, and Experian. The worksheets that I gave you, I think it's page 3, that tells you how to check this. It's got that address on it. Don't check all 3 of them at the same time. Instead, what you should do is check Equifax this month. Wait a few months, check Experian. Wait a few months, check TransUnion. They're all going to have slightly different data because they measure things differently, but it will give you a more consistent and year-round approach to checking your credit reports to see if there are any glaring errors. What you're looking for is somebody's name on your credit report that doesn't belong there, a card or a loan that you never opened, someone's address on there that is not your own. These are the kinds of things you're looking for that are evidence of fraud. If you suspect fraud has happened, you need to alert the credit reporting agency immediately. They're going to want a police report from you that says, yes, you have been victimized by identity theft. They have to have that police report in order to proceed with fixing the problem. And it can take years sometimes to fix identity theft once they've actually gone out and opened a new account in your name to say you are not responsible for that debt that's now on your account. The best way then to protect yourself against these kinds of things happening is to set up a security freeze. What a security freeze does is it makes those credit reports invisible. So let's say con artist gets a hold of all of my personal information, including my social security number. They call Visa and say, I want to open up a new credit card. My name is Kelly Griese. Here's my social security number. Here's my address. Here's my phone number. This is my pet's name. This is my mom's maiden name. They've got it all. Visa says, great. They start entering in all the information, and then a screen pops up on their computer that says, we cannot proceed with this transaction because there is a security freeze on this account. If a person who's going to issue you credit can't check your credit reports, if they can't look at them, they're not going to issue that credit. Your credit report shows that you are trustworthy with money. And if they don't know if you're trustworthy with money, they're not going to give you any. So this is the best way to protect yourself, setting up these freezes. They are free in the state of Indiana. Most states charge you for this program. They're also available to people under the age of 18. That didn't used to be the case. It used to be that they said, well, you shouldn't have a credit report if you're not 18. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people under the age of 18 who have credit reports because they've already been victimized. So you can set up a security freeze for anyone who has a social security number now. It's a lengthy process, a more lengthy process to set it up for a minor than it is for an adult, but it's still possible to do that. This would be really valuable to everyone right now, especially in light of the Equifax breach, to lock down your credit reports. When you have a credit report in place, or a credit freeze in place, you will need to lift it if you want to open up a new line of credit. So let's say you want to open a new credit card. You need to apply for a loan. Maybe you're getting housing and the landlord needs to check your credit report. Maybe you're applying for a job and they need to check your credit report. You'll have to lift it temporarily. When you put these credit reports in place, and the 4th page of your worksheets has the details for how to do this, you'll get some kind of security pin. It's about 15 digits long, I think. You're not going to memorize it, and I wouldn't store it anywhere digitally. They'll send it to you in the mail. Put it in a safe place in your home. And if you need to lift the security freeze, you can do so with that PIN code by visiting their website or by calling. It releases it almost immediately to lift it and let someone else look at it. You can lift it temporarily, you can lift it permanently, or you can lift it for a specific organization. I wanted to get a new phone from Verizon a while back, and they needed to check my credit report to do that. They told me that Experian was the company that they use. So I was able to open just the Experian credit report and only for Verizon to be able to look at it, no one else. Do you guys have questions for me about any of this stuff? Oh, I mentioned I would talk about, what was I going to talk about? Calls, do not call list, thank you. So do not call list, everyone complains about it, especially senior citizens. They hate the do not call list because it doesn't really work. Okay, so it does work, it just doesn't work the way we think it does. Do not call list literally is a list. It says you have opted out of receiving calls from telemarketers. You don't want to receive those calls from them anymore. And so legitimate businesses out there look at that list and say, you know what, Kelly doesn't want to hear from us, so we're not going to call her, because they want to stay in good legal standing in this country. Fraudsters who already have every intention of lying to you and stealing your money don't care about that list. They will keep calling you. The do not call list is not an electronic block on those kinds of calls. All it is saying that you've opted out of telemarketing. So it works, it just doesn't work the way we wish it would. My best suggestion to you again, screening your calls, don't answering any ones that you don't recognize. You guys have questions? So quiet.
More questions?
Do you have questions?